happy Friday, sort of. The first debate between Trump and Biden happened last night, and apparently the Democratic political machine is in a panic because Joe Biden has been exposed quite terribly, depending on which side of the political divide you fall on, as well as whether or not you believe whatever histrionics are being pushed out as excuses, or whether or not you watched it for yourself and you saw it all happen in real time. I did not watch the debate more accurately, because I've only had one so far. So in a lot of respects, I don't really have a leg to stand on in terms of my reaction to it, because I'm going off of how the internet reacted, and the reactions essentially were that Biden was a potato and Trump destroyed him. I mean, okay, that's fair. But as far as I'm concerned, the debate was still a national disgrace, because instead of putting up two differently viable candidates for different reasons, meaning a younger, more vibrant Republican candidate and a younger, more vibrant Democratic candidate, we have two old white guys. Now I'm tired of race politics, because it's been nothing but trouble for the last 30 years or more. But yeah, at this point it's time for a constitutional amendment to put a mandatory upper age limit on who can hold office in the House, the Senate, the presidency, and the Supreme Court. This is how I want it to go down. If it was me doing this is how I would set it up. I would put in place, through a constitutional amendment, a mandatory upper age limit on who is eligible for office in the House, the Senate, and the presidency, as well as the Supreme Court. This is how I would do it. First of all, for the House, Senate, and presidency, the mandatory upper age limit cutoff is now 70 years old. No more of this, senators into their 80s or 90s holding office. That's done. After my amendment goes through, unless you've already successfully won re-election for the term immediately preceding one election, or re-election for the term immediately preceding or during the time in which this amendment was being voted on in the House and the Senate and being adopted, you are no longer eligible for office at the federal level in terms of the House, the Senate, and the presidency if you are over the age of 70 or will become 70 years old in the year in which you would be running for election. And if you are already over the age of 70 or older, and you have already won election or re-election for the term immediately preceding or during the time this amendment was adopted, you retain eligibility for re-election for only 2 more terms in the House and 1 more term in the Senate. And that will take care of the ex post facto requirement. At least in my idealized world there. And when it comes to the presidency, you will become ineligible for election or re-election to the presidency of the United States if you will turn 70 in the first half of a presidential term, having already won, and you have not been elected to the presidency for a term already. Let me rephrase that, because I want to get this idea clearly across. If you're already president and you will become 70 in the first half of your second term, you are not eligible for re-election. if you will turn 70 in the second half of your presidential term, you'll retain eligibility for re-election. Because that kind of still keeps it more or less close. When it comes to the Supreme Court, there should be a mandatory upper age retirement limit, and all justices after January 1st, 2027, who are nominated to the bench after that date, nominated to and advance to the bench after January 1st, 2027, shall be required to retire in the year, at the end of the term, in the year in which they will have their 80th birthday. So, since the Supreme Court term for this year is coming to a close, I believe quite soon, and they'll be in recess until the fall, if I was going to be 80 this year, at the end of this term, it would be required for me to retire from the bench. Fair. If I was going to be 80 in, let's say I was going to be 80, I was already 80 in March, just for fun. At the end of this term, I would have to step down from the bench. Fair. However, also, if I was going to be 80 in December, I would have to step down at the end of this term for the Supreme Court, because I would reach my 80th birthday in this calendar year. That's how I think it should go down, because we need these upper age limits to start turning things over at the federal level. We also need term limits. I think we should also put that in, but I think it's going to be easier to get an age limit amendment passed than it will be to get a term limit amendment passed. So we'll start with the age limit, and then we'll see if we get the term limits in there as well. But yeah, this is a disgrace. This is also an embarrassment in front of the world that we have these two old farts vying for the presidency. We've got a potato and a narcissist, and there's no one viable to replace them, because the Democrats don't have anybody else who could win a national election at this point. Gavin Newsom is a dead stick. Kamala Harris is a dead stick. Gretchen Whitmer is a dead stick. They don't have anyone in the roster right now who they can develop and put out there who has any form of a chance to win the critical battleground states, not to mention energize the base in such a way that would actually, not just energize the base, but also swing independents, as well as perhaps centrist Republicans. They don't have anybody. And the fact that we couldn't put anyone up who was not Donald Trump this year, it's a bit of an annoyance. And I gotta be honest here. In a just world, one of two scenarios with Donald Trump would have happened. First scenario, which I think honestly should have happened to begin with, Donald Trump should already be in his second term as president, and that means he would be constitutionally ineligible to run again. He would essentially be playing kingmaker during his second term, and it would have been his chosen successor on the stage last night against whoever the Democratic nominee was, or would have been, because it would have been Biden. Scenario number two, which, considering how 2020 played out, I think this is, in a lot of ways, this would have been better for the nation had he done this. But that's me, in my opinion. He should have stepped aside gracefully and focused on playing kingmaker during the intervening years, so that essentially his chosen candidate would have had the support of his base in order to into this election year. That would have been ideal. But because Trump took the loss personally, round 2. Here we go. Fight! But at this point, it's not much of a fight. If the election was to be held today, Donald Trump is winning. No question about it. No question about it. The question now becomes, how will the Democratic National Committee and the Democratic Party handle the convention? Will they attempt to replace Joe Biden? Legally, can they replace Joe Biden? Those are 2 questions to which I do not have a clear answer. But, nevertheless, here we are. And the next 5 or 10 days of politics are going to be really interesting. So we'll see what happens. But regardless of what happens with this election cycle, it's time to amend the Constitution. It's past time, really, to set age limits on who can be in office at the federal level. Because these old folks still in office are a disgrace. And they are also an embarrassment to the U.S. on a global level. So it's time for that to change. With that being said, YouTube, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you down the road.